there's something special about this project that has taken on a life of its own.
Yeah, and it's really a calling card to a bygone era, and I wouldn't want to say the origin story of a lot of these elements like roller derby and wrestling and boxing, but they were such a different, and they've created a different evolution in every level. I mean, even from the punk show era, it's the evolution is garnered, a different direction and a different idea. And so I'm curious, the simplicity of those times, of those specific things, boxing, wrestling, roller derby, was that more of what you were aiming for in highlighting the Olympic, or was it more of the Olympic being the highlighting of that?
A little bit of both. I think they're really tied together. I think I didn't want it to be, it'd be very easy. By nature, it could be a very nostalgic film. And I wanted to work to kind of undercut that a little bit through the historical context that, that I weave through the film as well, because there was a beauty and a simplicity to a lot of what was going on that I really respect. And you're talking about craft before, and I think the craft of wrestling, for example, it was spectacle, of course. And growing up in LA and watching it on TV, because the Olympic was always on TV in LA. If you're, my mid-50s, for anyone like 50 and up, it was always like, between wrestling and roller derby and boxing, the Olympic was was omnipresent. I just feel like it was like I absorbed it. And Richmond 95171, the phone number, they hammered it all the time. Yeah. And my childhood memories of wrestling, in particular wrestling and roller derby, were just like turning it on and watching with my sister and being just like jaw-dropping, and it being kind of so out there and wild that was really interesting to me. And then as I got into it and started to interview wrestlers and dig into it, I really appreciated the craft. Because if you look at it, what they were doing was like improvisational acting with physicality. Yeah. Because they had a predetermined outcome. Spoiler alert, people who believe us. Anyway, yes, they knew what was going to happen at the end. And they had some moves that like, okay, we're going to do this and that a little bit. But really it depended on guys working off of each other. And, there were themes and sort of like, an end storyline that they were working towards that would be like, that some of these would last for a year, building up for like a year, like the Freddie Blassie, John Carlos feud that ended up in the Coliseum being for 25,000 people at the LA Coliseum. That was for a long time the biggest wrestling show of all time. That took a year to set up, where Freddie Blassie went from bad guy slowly to good guy, and then Tolos came in and they did this whole shtick with the powder thrown in the face that blinded Blassie. That was like, and it was all set up over time. And the fact that these guys in front of it, when it was a packed, a 10,000 seat venue, two guys who could absolutely command the attention of the audience and bring out so much emotion. It's like, that's incredible acting. That's incredible craft. And so I really appreciated that. I came to learn to really appreciate the skill of that. Yeah. Roller derby, the absurdity on some level of roller derby, of course, too, but these people could skate their butts off, and they were real athletes. And really like, so again, predetermined, though the roller derby people all claim they've,
especially the T-Birds.
The T-Birds, I mean, that were so great. I mean, I love the T-Birds.
Never lost, but why? Why they never lost?
They'd always come back at the very end and win. Like, it was always in the last jam. Yeah. Somehow they were down 8 and they got 10 and they won by 1 or 2. Like, it was like, oh my God, in the final jam, oh yes, they won. And so I appreciate all that. So
It's an art form.
So it is an art form. It's a craft. And then the boxing, which was real, except when it wasn't, when there was, the fixed fights and there was a mob element that was really another area of, I so went down the LA rabbit hole, and I read so much going back to books about, from LA at the forming of the city to, when California became part of the United States, and LA for a couple of years was almost like an independent, state in the mid 1800s, and what the roots of that were and the conflicts that were built in, and how the Olympic in 1925 was opened at the height of the craziest period in LA history, because the money and the oil money and movie business and hucksters. There was so much going on at that time. Yeah. And the fact that the Olympic was like immediately, and I don't get a chance to get into all of the depth of the story, but I had to understand the depth of the story. But sure. It was immediately bankrupt. It went over budget and went into arrears, and then the LA Athletic Club took it over. So it was born in controversy. It was a failure, really, for a lot of years, until Aileen Eaton made a go of it. That's what became so interesting for me in the story, and what just, to me animates the film. And the hardest part was the edit, was to cover it. There was the fan service part of it, which was I really needed to get it right for the fans of boxing, wrestling, roller derby, and punk rock, or they would call me out, as I had been on whenever I could made a mistake on whenever I did, and continue sometimes to do on social media. I get called out immediately because it's super. So I had to make sure that they were there, while at the same time I wanted to make a film that a general audience could get into and could follow people who were into LA history, into just a great story.
Aileen Eaton demanded respect and got it.
I always knew that Aileen was called the Dragon Lady, and I thought that was so cool, because to me, dragons are to be feared, and I thought that's great. They respected her, they feared her.
Don't ever double-cross her. Don't ever lie to her.
The biggest promoters around, you see the way they used to treat her. Bob Arum just used to shake in front of her. Don King was afraid to say hello to her, and she used to get a kick out of it.
If she didn't like you, well, she wouldn't allow you in her building.
Well, if you were on the shit list, you were not on the door list.
She comes walking in, and I said, "Hello, Aileen," and she just looked through me. I knew I was on her list,
I just admire her veracity and the fact that she hung in there and did what she loved at a time when it must have been twice as hard as it was for me.
Manager Jackie Callum says her ambition is to be the first lady of boxing, and a proper ambition it is in this building tonight, which was, for 40 years, run by a woman, a grand impresario named Aileen Eaton.
Aileen is such a fixture. She is really the focal point of the idea of why the Olympic was what it was, and how it succeeded or didn't succeed, and all that. I'm curious from you, in all your research and doing all this and putting this all together, and then getting these interviews done about her, what did you really come away with? What did you take away from learning about her and experience? Because obviously you started this well after she had passed. So talk a little bit about how much she influenced your choices and what she gave you that you didn't expect.
Aileen was such an interesting and complex character.
Yeah.
And I really, because I didn't have the coverage and because of the limitations of the film itself, I couldn't really get into all the depth of her character. And I felt like I've really gotten to know her through the people who knew her. And she's from British Columbia. She came to LA as a teenager. She married fairly young. Her husband was not ambitious, but she made him a very well-known character. He was like one of the early sort of fat doctors in Hollywood, where he was like peddled weight loss specialists. He had an office on Wilshire Boulevard, and women, sort of wealthy women, would come in, and Aileen would have this sort of whole diet and weight loss regimen, and he was the front, and he was really a chiropractor, and she sort of made him well known. In fact, there was a one of Cary Grant's first movies is the story of a doctor, an early fat doctor named Dr. Maurice Lamar.
Yeah,
name was Maurice LaBelle, her husband.
Yeah.
And it was based on his story, a fictionalized version of that in the 30s. Something happened in their marriage, whether it was her not being satisfied with his ambition or whatever it was, she divorced him. She had these 2 young sons, and she figured out, she got a job working for the LA Athletic Club. And Aileen, you know, she was someone who took no shit. I think if you think about it, you know, what women were running any large company in America at that time, let alone, you know, wrestling and boxing. She was also very clever in that she was, for a long time, she hid behind the scenes. She did the hard work of managing the building, running the promotion, and was the brains behind the operation, as she learned in the 40s and built, you know, and she, you know, so Cal Eaton, who was her husband, was the front man of the promotion.
Right.
Cal was a drunk. Cal could barely get it together. Cal would show up for weigh-ins and then go to the golf course and golf with Chief Parker of the LAPD and all these other guys who were drunks, and then go pass out in the afternoon, and maybe they'd show up at the fights or not, but Aileen was the one counting the tickets, doing the promotion. And then, so when the time came, she was able to step forward, and she then, you know, in the early 60s, she put herself forward and then became this sort of infamous character.
You know, as documentary filmmakers go, oftentimes you have this idea you're going to go into it with, and you're going to figure out, you know, what your plan is to start with. But then when you get to the editing, or you get to the actual shooting of the interviews and things like that, it evolves and changes. And I'm curious, was the story meant to be about Aileen, or was it more about the Olympic, and how did it evolve for you in the process?
Well, it's always been a push and pull and a tug, and because Aileen is such a strong character, you know, she is a dynamo, and there were many people along the way quite a few people along the way who just said, make it an Aileen doc because she deserves a doc. And I can't argue with that, but that really wasn't my intention. From the beginning, I wanted to make it a story of the place. You know, when I began the interview process and realized how much the emotion that bubbled up when people talked about the place. And then also when we did our social media campaign for our Kickstarter, you know, and I really developed our social, the kind of intensity of feeling for the place was just, it verified my thought at the beginning that this should be about the place, with Aileen's story as a through line that would give you an emotional hook to the film. So it wasn't just, and then this happened, and they did this there, and they did this there, and they did this there. So the plan was kind of, I've gone back and looked at my initial treatment that I wrote in like 2013, 2014 for this, maybe even earlier. And it's remarkably similar to what the film ended up being.
Interesting.
But you know, the zigs and the zags along the way, and obviously you can only cover what you have. obviously there's lots of creative ways to cover where you don't have footage.
Yeah.
You know, more and more people are using animation and other recreations and all of that. So anyway, so those choices were very tricky. I did, you know, there were like 30 edits to this film to get it to its final form.
And I got to imagine for a music guy, somebody for people who don't know, you were in the music industry for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
For a music guy, I know that you probably wanted to touch on a lot more than you did. But what I found fascinating about this, and kind of correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like your music background really lent itself to the pacing and the tone of this story, that you really gave the element of the punk rock into the story itself instead of just telling the story about the punk rock time and the time that this fit. Was that something you discovered in the edit to put your signature on, or were you feeling like I always wanted to have kind of a musical pace to this?
Well, I mean, I give a lot of credit to our editor, Shane McClafferty, who was a specific choice because he's a drummer, and he.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, because he was so great at rhythmically cutting to music. You know, obviously it was an incredible learning experience to do this film, and you know, you make a choice, and your choices, you know, of who you choose help really, you know, they dictate what the film is going to be in many ways. And so early on, when I was talking to people about editors and approaching editors, there were so many different ways to go with this movie. It could have been more sort of mournful, slower, more drawn out, longer. And I met with some great editors who I think would have done it in that way. And that would be a different choice. And it probably could have been just, I'm not saying it would be better or worse. I made a choice that I really wanted this to be pop culture-y, you know. My company is called Gen Pop for a reason, general population. I wanted it to be something that a mass audience could. I didn't want a Ken Burnsy style doc. I wanted a doc that made sense with the venue. I mean, there's a wrestling bear. I mean, come on. I mean, this is a place where larger than life characters and absurd kind of things that in these days you couldn't do and get away with, and so I wanted that style. So yes, music was important. Having Shane on board was extremely, like, he was just the right guy for me. Nice. Because I really wanted the music to drive this thing, and I wanted the music to be a big part of it. And I also wanted to have the soundtrack is all LA. That's a sort of other story of the movie, and I wanted to keep the
fantastic choice,
the verisimilitude. I wanted to keep it authentic to place. Yeah. So all the music is from LA or bands that played at the Olympic. So that was my little out. Like the Dead Kennedys from San Francisco or Bay Area played the Olympic multiple times. So that was, I felt like that was.
San Francisco, California, via Cambodia, the Dead Kennedys!
I felt like if I got the details right and the music felt right, it would drive this, and it sort of dictated the fact that I wanted the movie to be kind of tight and short. Like, you know, the one critique that I've gotten from some people is that it's so packed with information. It just goes and goes, and it's relentless. And that is true. I wanted almost this sense of, I wanted this sense of almost like delirium that you enter the building, you're going in and you're experiencing this sort of LA this over time, this rise and fall story, the story of Aileen and the story of the city, and punk rock. Going back to punk rock is like, it felt like at one point this was a much longer, as every film goes through this process. Punk was a bigger, longer section.
Sure.
But what was clear to me was in the scope of the story that I was telling. It was more of a coda.
Yeah.
It was Gary Tovar, the promoter of the Olympics. It was like a shooting star, and so it couldn't last. It was so, the Olympic was like Eileen's Magic Kingdom. It was like a special place. Rock was like when the Aileen left, it was like all of the violence that had been in that place exploded. It was like supernova. It was the ultra violence, and that was like the flame out of a star. It just like gone.
And for a first-time filmmaker, did you have any interpretation about how you designed this, or did you feel like the story you were going to tell lent itself to your style?
To answer your question, I didn't really understand how hard it would be to edit this film. Here's what I did. I stepped in shit to some degree. I designed something that was really, really hard to hit because I had multiple storylines going on at the same time that I had to weave together, and I didn't quite recognize how hard that was going to be to do, and how frustrating that could be at times, and how multiple versions, I would show the film in rough cut form to people and they wouldn't get it. And they liked parts of it, and they would be like, oh, give me various suggestions. Oh, you should be in the film, like talking about why it matters to you. And I was like, no. That means I'm failing. This isn't my story. Yeah. This is not about me. So that means I have to go back to the drawing board and figure this out again, because it's not coherent. The post-production was a bear. I cannot lie. It would have been so much easier if I just made this the Aileen Eaton story, or if I just made it a series of like sections.
Yeah.
And then there was the boxing, and then there was the wrestling, and then there was the roller derby, and then there was the punk rock, and each one having a section, and then just kind of, that would have been the easy way. But I felt like that was a cop out, and it wasn't good enough. There was, Shane, who was my, main editor, finish editor, and I had Mary McNulty, who was my story editor, an AE, and she and I would be, there were times where we would just be like, I hate our fucking movie. I fucking hate it. And we're failing. It's so boring. How is wrestling boring? It's not boring, but this is so boring. It's like, what are we doing wrong? And I just had to keep working at it, and I had to keep trying, and I had to keep cutting. I cut characters. I sent a version of this to a very prominent wrestling blogger and historian, and he really liked the film. He was complimentary, but he was very upset that Dick Lane wasn't, who was the wrestling and roller derby announcer, wasn't featured prominently. His voice is in there, but I didn't get into his story. And I was like, I get where you're coming from, but here's what I had to do. I said, he was in there.
Yeah.
And I have great material on Dick Lane. And I hope one day to release that material and find a way to tell that story, or do a wrestling piece that's a standalone piece in which I can get into Dick Lane. I had to pare away characters, because if I didn't, I lost Aileen.
Yeah.
I got into all of these other characters. I kept finding that the core of the film got lost, and it became too much characters that the general audience would lose on the way and be like, who cares?
Yeah.
Like, why are we talking about this? And so then when you paired, and then you got down to just mentions, then there's really no purpose for them being in the film.
Yeah.
Because unless they're serving a story purpose, there's not enough meat on the bone to tell their story. The film structured itself so well from when I first understood it in eras. And 1980 was always the year that I knew it had to pivot. And so I did have the idea in mind, but I just, I couldn't figure out how to do it until working and working and working. And I was hell bent on getting it right.
And along those lines, you did, as you mentioned earlier, you did a lot of research beforehand, and you've spent many years putting this together and forming this.
Mm-hmm.
It was very interesting for me to see Roddy Piper in this. And along those lines, Roddy Piper and the Guerreros was another great story you told.
It was just a process, and the process, it took me a long time to get to where I really was happy with it. I mean, even in the final edits, we flipped some sections around and it like opened it up. Like we did like, hey, it's almost done, but what if we took the John Doe thing and we moved it up a little bit rather than stick it at the very end and keep it made it slightly a little less linear, but it opens the film up and gives it like a different perspective. In learning this, I did that. I did the Werner Herzog masterclass, and one of the biggest lessons that he was just like, you cannot not finish your film. That was like the biggest of all. He had lots of great things, but the one thing was like, you can't not finish. And I know so many partially finished docs out there. There's a zillion of them, and people who just hit a point where they couldn't just get it over the edge. And I wasn't going to be that person. I had made a promise to these people that I was going to tell their stories, and I was going to do the best job I could, and I couldn't leave it undone, and I couldn't not do it as well as I could. So I now, whatever anyone thinks of the film, it's the best I could do. I don't have those doubts like, oh, someone took it away from me, and the financier did. I fought and I got it done the way I wanted to do it. I got the music. I begged, got a great music supervisor who's an old friend, and he did it as for way below like bargain basement. And we begged and we got favors and we got great music through everything that I wanted to do. I mean, we've got Queens of the Stone Age. We got War. We have like big acts, Shiggy Otis. We got great stuff. And I'm so proud of that. I'm really, at the end of the day, I'm really proud of the movie. I feel like it's, nothing's ever perfect.
Yeah.
But it's the best that I could do. And if people love it, I hope they do. I think the fans will really like it. I hope a general audience will love it. I can't control that. Yeah. I'm doing my best to now use going back into my old marketing head from the music business and adapt what I knew how to do into a new medium, and figure out this crazy, marketing a film during COVID. How do you do the film festivals now? How much to do virtual? How much, it's all a challenge, but it's an interesting one, and I'm excited for the world to see it and to, hopefully enjoy it.
Make you better. In the long run, you're going to be a better person. You're going to be a better filmmaker. You're going to be a better marketer. All of those things help you. And along those lines, I wanted to ask you one last question, which is, what do you love about indie film?
I love the freedom of it. I love the ability for an individual and a team. And I had a very, very loyal and have a wonderful loyal team who are now helping me fight to market the film too, and using all of their connections and everyone they know and everything that I love the camaraderie of, like, I feel like we're battle tested. Some people fell out along the way, but the core team that exists now, that is the last people standing, I owe them so much. I am eternally grateful, am hopeful, and I've said to them is that, that I want to do everything in my power in this process to help them elevate their profiles and do anything I can do to make it work for everyone who's been so generous with me. I'm someone who love working with a team. I love my peeps, I love my peeps. I really do, and I really I'd go to battle with any of these guys and women, this team that I have, and I love indie film, and I can't wait to do. I recognize now that it's going to be like a period of time in which I am devoted to marketing and working that side of the film, but I'm looking forward to the next one too.